Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amyr Rocha-Lima.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast is brought to you by Holland, Harlan Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland, Harlan Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. I'm joined today by Debby Penton. Debby is the MD of Wildfire PR, a tech PR agency delivering high-impact campaigns that build market awareness, engage target audiences, and drive sales for tech businesses. What's unique about Debby is her understanding of the importance of stories, going beyond simply listing features and functionality of products in order to really engage her clients' customers. And be sure to listen to the end, where Debby shares with us some helpful tips on building a PR strategy in your own firm. So whether you're interested in knowing more about the world of tech PR, or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston Podcast. Welcome, Debby Penton, to the Inside Kingston Podcast. Debby, I'm really excited about this conversation because I think, firstly, public relations in tech, as I've found out, moves at a very fast pace. But if I just sort of take a step back, I think it's really important that businesses understand the function of public relations in their firm. Even small one-man band business owners can do well by understanding the function that discipline has within their business. And therefore, of course, given your position and your experience in this area, I think that our listeners can learn a lot from you. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time, if that's okay. So, Debby, where did you grow up?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I didn't grow up a million miles away from here. It's just down the M3 in a place called Camberley. And I like being this side of town. And so, I was drawn to Kingston and my husband had lived here. So I haven't moved very far. Very
cool. And what did you study after secondary school?
I went to Sheffield Uni and I did a business studies degree.
Oh, awesome. And could you tell us a little bit about your career journey before you joined Wildfire PR?
Yeah, sure. So as part of my degree, I had to do a placement and I ended up working, I quite like marketing side of things, and I worked in marketing at a software house in Peterborough. And then when I moved down to London, I was sort of pigeonholed in this kind of world of IT that I wasn't necessarily sure I wanted to be part of, but there seemed to be a lot of opportunity in it. And so I moved down to London, I had some marketing jobs and sort of fell into PR, to be honest. So very early on, I started working in tech PR and I started kind of understanding what was going on with the world, and it was obviously booming. It's not really a sector that's struggling, and so I kind of moved around to a variety of different agencies in that time and joined Wildfire back in 2002 when it was just a kind of very small company across the bridge in Hampton Wick. I knew I didn't want to commute. I was just moving to Kingston, and so I kind of wanted to work for a local business. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Very cool. Now, there's quite a few threads in that I want to pull with you throughout this conversation. For the benefit of our listeners, let me start at the beginning, and I think this will be an education for me too. Could you perhaps explain the synergy between a firm's PR strategy with what I think is most sort of highlighted normally in the media, which is their content marketing or their SEO strategy?
Yeah, so I think that the big difference between maybe PR and content is that with PR, we're convincing independent people to write about us or to talk about us or our clients. And so with content marketing, you can just say what you like. I mean, frankly, with advertising, you can say what you like within the confines of the advertising standards. With PR, you have to convince someone independent, that used to just be a journalist, to talk positively about your client, and that therefore is held in a much higher regard because it's got that independence and credibility with it that you just writing stuff about yourself doesn't necessarily have. So that's really where the power of PR comes in.
And I think that's really interesting because, again, if I filter this back to our small business owner listenership, there's definitely some lessons that they can pick up there from getting people to talk about them, which is what you're saying. Of course, in tech PR, you have this challenge, which is to get features and functionalities of technology products to become a story. And with that in mind, are there any tips that you would give people, Debbie, when they're thinking in their own firm about just maybe even like a mental model of how to think of features and functionalities becoming actual stories?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the problem that most people caught up in their own world of their own thing often feel that their product service is the most interesting and important thing. And actually, it's not. Nobody really writing about features and functionality. When we talk about technology, for example, unless you're talking to a very techie publication, generally you're telling a story about the problem that tech solves. So you really need to get into the mindset of your target customer and think, what struggles are they having? How can we solve that problem, and how can we tell a story that they're going to engage with on a human level? Because we engage with human stories, other people's struggles, those sorts of things. And we're not going to read articles about, any sort of, just technology for the sake of it, for example.
Yeah, especially as you're right, especially as an end consumer of quite a bit of technology. If I look around my house, I'm a bit of a geek anyway, so I do like that stuff. But you're right, I don't think even I'm fairly savvy when it comes to technology. I don't read up about my next bit of tech in terms of the actual functionality or the specific features of it. It's more about, even when I think about just reverse engineering it in my own mind, it is more about the what next from a problem solving perspective, even if it's my own internal sort of understanding of what my quote unquote problem is that I want to solve with that piece of tech.
Absolutely.
So Debbie, appreciate you sharing those tips with us. I'd like to sort of pull another thread with you, if I may, because I think that one, it's really interesting that a business like yours is placed here in Kingston and is attracting talent that is in that world here to our area. So I think that's really cool. And I'd like to ask you a little bit more about that versus, for example, why you haven't relocated to London. And also, I understand that recently you've completed a management buyout of the company. So if nothing else, given that you're local to the area as well, hopefully that means an even longer life for wildfire in our area.
Well, yes, I very much hope so. So I'll start with the MBO first. Wildfire in various forms has been around for about 30 years. It's gone through, as many businesses do, lots of kind of different stages of life. And actually, Wildfire was merged with a business called Electronic Marketing Limited, which has been in the boathouse in Canberra Gardens in Kingston for many, many years. The owner of that business was reaching kind of the end of his working life. And so he was looking for a way to kind of monetize his life's work, really. And and so there was an appetite for kind of how do we move this business on to the next stage of its life? And having looked at various options, I think that ultimately an MBO management buyout seemed like the most obvious choice. I'd like to say that I've completed it, but I've actually started it. So anyone familiar with an MBO will know that there's usually quite a few years afterwards that you have to continue paying out. So, and that we completed at the beginning of last year, which was brilliant timing with COVID and us worrying about cash flow. But thankfully we've got through that. And things are going quite well. So what that's done is kind of unleash a lot of ambition within the agency. We're very much focusing on growing. We want to be the best technology PR agency in the UK, even in Europe. But we love being in Kingston. I think that actually we've got a lot of competitors who are in London and have moved to London from Reading or what have you because it's easier to recruit. I think the last year has probably done us some favours. We can actually park around here and we have parking space. That's not something that most other people can do. The the situation of our office is absolutely stunning. We're literally a boathouse on the river. And I think that we've got an growing number of facilities around here. So that's really, a key attraction point. And it's easy to get into London to meet our clients. Most of our team probably, are only going to be in the office come September, maybe 3 days a week now. And a lot of them live kind of outside of London and don't really want to do that big commute and sit on a train anymore. Things have changed recently. But also we bring in quite a lot of people, move from around the country to get a job with us. Recently, one of my new starters has moved to Norbiton. Quite a lot of people live in Surbiton. And so that kind of attraction of being able to walk to work is quite special as well. So I think having a hub in London will probably be important when things start picking up again. But and I'm a little bit biased because I also live in Kingston, so it's very convenient for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a lovely area, and it's great. I've interviewed another technology firm who also has a strong presence here in Kingston. And it's great that there's a variety of businesses now that, of course, as you mentioned, probably post-COVID are starting to clock onto this idea of creating a work-life balance for their employees by being slightly outside of London. And thankfully, it's turned out to be an advantage to you. And actually, with that in mind, Debbie, I wouldn't mind sort of picking your brains on something here, because I've asked this question continuously to every guest pretty much over the last 15 months. In your world, how has COVID affected your business?
I think we were quite lucky because we're in quite a strong sector. And actually, a lot of companies in the tech sector have boomed through this time. So that gave us, after the initial shock and, oh my God, how's it going to work? I think actually we had quite a steady year. We didn't grow, but we didn't shrink either. And so I think that's in a good place to be. Also, we already had, being a tech savvy sort of company, we'd already adopted, cloud-based everything. So working from home for the team was more of a matter of making sure everyone had the right desk set up. A lot of them came and took their computers home. The biggest challenge really was keeping that sense of team and collaboration, and being conscious that a lot of my team are quite young and perhaps maybe lived in a flat share or on their own, and that's quite isolating. And so we were really much more focused on the kind of mental health than actually, because we were lucky enough not to have to worry so much about business health. I mean, we were worried about it, but not as much as the individuals. So I think, I think we've been quite lucky actually. And it's good because it's kind of accelerated that sort of more flexible working. We were pretty flexible already, but I think, people like the idea that they don't have to commute to work on a Monday morning. Nobody likes that.
Yeah. It's interesting how different businesses and different business owners have shared stories here on the podcast that I find have parallels with my own business and with our profession, which is nothing to do with PR, right? I'm in finance. But that consciousness of being very much aware of the potential cultural breakdown that COVID would cause into a business was the same concern that we had. We luckily as well had a business that not only survived, but thankfully we thrived through lockdown, and we feel very blessed that being the case. But of course, we were just acutely aware of the fact that different people have different working environments and different situations. So that cultural element was something we really doubled down on. And it's really worked well for us, because I think coming out of this now, people appreciate that they're still part of a team. There's no shock with, oh, now I'm going back to the office and being part of a team. That sense has been there in one shape or another. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Debbie, for our listeners who are students at Kingston University and perhaps are listening to this episode and thinking, oh, I've thought about a career in marketing or a career in public relations, I wasn't that aware of tech PR being a niche within that sector. What could you tell those listeners in terms of how perhaps, just some tips about perhaps how can they get to know more about tech PR and maybe even show an interest in getting a job or some work experience in that area?
Well, we work quite closely with Kingston University. We've done a lot of their career fairs. I've gone in and done some sort of speed interviewing. I'm actually starting to study there in September myself. I'm going to do a part-time master's. So that's, cool. Which will forge an even closer connection to the university. So I think that, tech PR and PR isn't really that different. I think there's definitely a need to have an interest in how things work. and how to communicate more complex things into interesting stories. But I'm no tech geek, couldn't build a computer. I couldn't really tell you in depth about how things work, but I've had a career for 25 years in technology PR purely because just showing an understanding of things. And it, how can you not really, because technology is changing everything that we do. So I think that just having a keen interest in that, it's really important to be able to write. Written content is just fueling everything right now. We work really closely with content marketing to make sure that PR isn't just about getting in the media. It's about having content that brings people to your website, that gets backlinks, that, supports your visibility online as well as in kind of print. It's much more complex than just talking to a few journalists. It's everything. And so, that kind of understanding about a versatility, I think, is a really key thing, to write, to be great with relationships, whether it's journalists or clients and colleagues. So yeah, I think, and anyone, I'd urge anyone who's interested in finding out more to get in touch with us. Always open to having a conversation. We're regularly recruiting. We love to recruit graduates and people from the bottom up and teach them how to do the job. Because it's quite hard to, you can learn PR in theory, but it's not a professional qualification sort of job. So you really need to kind of get hands on. Yeah.
Very cool. Debbie, what are some of the key business lessons that you've learned throughout your life?
One of the things that I've had to learn, and anyone who works with me will tell you that I have a fairly short attention span, and I really like that. They're laughing in the office as I say it, is to be patient. I kind of want everything done now, and I want to achieve all of my goals quickly. And certainly the last year, so we completed the initial part of the MBO last year, and then it was like, right, let's go. And of course suddenly then COVID hit, and that's quite you had to work on how I manage that, because then you have to you're generally taking a couple of years backwards in terms of your financial growth plans. And but it's really, it's the old saying that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I've now been working at Wildfire for 19 years in different formats. So it really is about sort of being a bit patient and knowing that just because something happens one day, it's not the end of the world, because, literally the next day you could be inundated with new business, and then you've got another problem of how to kind of manage that. So I think patient is one thing, but also I think one thing that I found is just really communication and being honest with people. We quite often see that people feel uncomfortable just kind of saying it how it is. But I think if people know where they stand and you can deliver that in a nice way to people, it's much easier to kind of get through any challenges if you're just kind of communicating and being honest. That's a kind of life lesson, right? But it's something I encourage people to do rather than try and stick their heads in the sand and not confront things.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and strongly second those 2 points. They've definitely held us in very good stead at our firm. When you look back at your career journey to date, what are you most proud of?
I think I'm really proud of the journey that the company's been on. I think since my old CEO stepped back and let me kind of take over the business to an extent, and he did that long before the MBO. It's just, I think what we've been able to create with the team, the general, the friendship that people have here. People are so keen to get back to the office after the whole COVID stuff. They just wanted to see each other. They just wanted to have a beer. But on top of that is that level of kind of professionalism, ambition that the team have got to actually do good work for clients, to work with clients who recognise them for working hard and are open to good ideas and things that are going to move things forward. I don't think anyone here is just about coming to work and doing their bare minimum and trotting back home again. Everyone wants to succeed. And it's just really exciting to sort of come to work and be around a whole group of people who are really clever and bring lots of different things to the business. So I'm genuinely really proud of the people that we've got here.
That's very cool. And what next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Growth. I mean, it's just all about sort of moving the business to the next level, really. And with growth comes opportunity for the teams and more exciting clients to work with. And then investment in the teams as well, and having more fun and doing more training and those sorts of things. So I think, that it's very much about kind of shaking off last year, but recognizing, continuing to invest in solid foundations, but looking forward to just doing, having more fun.
Exciting times ahead.
I hope so.
Excellent. As we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So
okay.
Debby, what do you do to relax outside of the office?
Well, I got a puppy in lockdown because I like to be, the same as everyone else.
Very cool.
And so I walk her. I paddleboard. I've got some paddleboards in the office, so like to do that when the weather's nice. And I go to the gym as well.
Very cool. And are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I haven't read any books that I'd recommend recently, to be honest. I'm looking forward to doing that in a summer holiday. But I listened to a couple of podcasts that, depending on what you're interested in. One's called Freakonomics, and it's all about the kind of science behind why people behave in the way that they do, with some interesting kind of stories that go along with it. So I guess that's quite aligned to PR and understanding why people make decisions. So I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, one of my favorite podcasts, Freakonomics. I think not only do they do storytelling in the financial world second to none, but their editing is superb. It's superb.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's very good. And are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I don't watch anything very highbrow. A lot of it's just about relaxing. And I think that at the moment, everyone's struggling for is there another Netflix thing that I can watch? So I absolutely adored Schitt's Creek. That made me laugh a lot through lockdown. I've just been watching Jeremy Clarkson's kind of journey on the farm, which is on Amazon. And that's really very good as well. That's good editing and storytelling for sure. And yeah, I mean, if anyone's got any recommendations, I'd love to hear them. I feel like I've exhausted Netflix.
Yeah, no, you're not alone. I think you're not alone. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
Just to our website, it's wildfirepr.com. Everything's there, how to get in touch. Loads of, we do a lot of blogging for SEO purposes, obviously, but obviously to show our understanding and experience. So there's loads of content there.
And for the benefit of our listeners, I'll make sure that I add that link to the show notes.
Thank you.
Debby, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Likewise, great to speak to you.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.